we're going to hear a very important story from Janet, a story about our history, our ancestors, and what that means for us today. And helping Janet is Joanna, Meg, Marilyn and Honey. And when they have completed their presentation, Sue G is going to sing a song that relates to what they have been talking about. I will introduce Sue G later, but I can't even see where she is at the moment, but she will come up and perform that song. So I think we'll crack on and leave you to do that.
Australia is running out of water. Nature has taken over the timetable. Gaia is struggling to keep the earth cool enough for life. Beware.
I'll bring drought and fire under filthy skies. I'll scorch the farmland and torch the forests. I'll raise the ocean, drown the cities. I'll spare no human being. So said the Furies of Earth in The Gift of the Furies, my friend and WCC founding member, the late Dr. Glenda Glockley's marvellous choral and dramatic adaptation of Aeschylus's famous play, The Eumenides. This play is one of the many teaching stories from ancient Greece about how to live in right relations with the earth. In Greek mythology, the Furies are the most ancient spirits of earth, female in form, who avenge wrongdoings against mothers and earth. In climate terms, the Furies are the awesome power of the earth that brings fires and floods and cyclones and other events that are beyond our control, our human power to control. We have been provoking that power for decades by our behaviour towards Mother Earth. In January 2020, with the Black Summer bushfires raging and choking smoke all around, the Furies seemed awfully real. But after more than a decade of bitter debate, our government was divided, seemingly unable to move the policy dial enough to create any coherent, nationally agreed plan to address climate risks. It was time for action. I distributed a discussion paper that I had been working on for a while about how women could lead an initiative to bring the polarised political positions together so that we could collaborate to transition our economy and lifestyles to a sustainable, regenerative future before we are overwhelmed by climate change. And this is where I make a bit of a digression to the story of the great-grandmothers who are the subject of this presentation, because I was inspired by the story of the women's peace movement in World War I, which we had been telling in a chorus of women since April 2015. Which marked the 100th anniversary of two significant events. The Anzac landings at Gallipoli, a human, his story of war and nationalism that continues to hold Australians in a curious spell. And the remarkable International Congress of Women, held at The Hague at the exact same time, at the end of April 1915, her story of great collective humanity, peace, and internationalism. And we tell this story with great humility to Indigenous women in the room and everywhere, whose stories are so much older than ours, and which they, you, have never forgotten, as we have done. In the build-up to World War I, women were already internationally networked through their struggle for women's suffrage and representation in public affairs. Many of the suffragist leaders were the first university-educated women of their day, the first lawyers, doctors, and so on, and many were social reformers with an international perspective. They included gay women and likely other diversities. Like women today, all of us here, who are horrified by potentially catastrophic impacts of climate change on our children and grandchildren, all future generations and life on Earth, these women were horrified by the needless sacrifice of human life that the war brought. Their story is our story. First, I would like to introduce you to Julia Grace Wales, a 33-year-old Canadian who in 1914 was working as an English literature scholar at the University of Wisconsin. She had many young German men in her class and was so impacted by the outbreak of World War I that she spent the northern winter break working on a plan to end the war called Continuous Mediation Without Armistice. She said that the world was thinking separately and needed a world-thinking organ to think together. She proposed that, without attributing blame to either side, the neutral nations should form an independent conference to mediate between the warring countries. This was, according to Julia Grace, the natural thing to do. Think about this. It was a time when mediation was unknown as a way of solving conflict, and all communication between enemy countries was banned. Yet this young woman was able to come up with a proposal to end the war essentially through dialogue. That feels like feminist foreign policy right there. We will hear the fate of her plan later.
Next, we have Vi Goldstein, the Australian peace activist and first woman to stand for the Australian Parliament, who was the owner-editor of the Melbourne-based newspaper Woman Voter. In August 1914, she wrote a piece for that newspaper. I think that it is a fearful reflection on 2,000 years of Christianity that men have rushed into war. The time has come for women to show that they, as givers of life, refuse to give their sons as material for slaughter, and that they recognise that human life must be the first consideration of nations. And next, we introduce three German activists, Clara Zetkin, Dr. Anita Augsburg, and Lida Gustafa Heymann. At Christmas 1914, they wrote letters via the Suffrage Alliance in America addressing British women. They said, "True humanity knows no national hatred, no national contempt. The blood of dead and wounded must not become a stream to divide what present need and future hope unite." In England, Emily Hobhouse organised the writing and signing of a letter from 101 British women. "Sisters," it began, "some of us wish to send you a word at this sad Christmastide. Anguish unites us, that we are passing together through the same experiences of pain and grief. The brunt of modern war falls upon non-combatants, and the conscience of the world cannot bear the sight."
A forerunner, maybe, of the commonly used open letter today. Some of us here in this room have participated in this in recent years.
And then there was Aletta Jacobs, the first Dutch medical doctor who had experienced firsthand the effects of war, and in February 1915 she initiated a meeting in The Hague of 41 women from Holland, Belgium and Germany to plan for an international meeting of women. They set a date for just 10 weeks after this meeting, invited the famous American social reformer Jane Addams to preside, and then they got to work contacting the women of the world through thousands of telegrams. Based on Arletta's actual letter to the women of the world, here is a chorus of women singing a call of the women of the world as part of Glenda Clochley's community oratorio telling the story of the Congress.
In the US, Jane Addams gathered a delegation of American women, including Julia Grace Wales, to make the Atlantic crossing to The Hague to attend the International Congress of Women. At this largely forgotten Congress, the only international peace congress on the war, some 1,300 women delegates gathered from 12 warring and neutral countries. Telegrams and messages of support were received from thousands of other women from every corner of the globe. The patriarchy was not impressed. 180 women from Britain were prevented from coming to because Winston Churchill stopped all the shipping between England and Holland leading up to and during the Congress to stop those dangerous women from attending. Luckily, 3 British women were already in The Hague. The Belgian delegation was denied travel permits by the occupying forces, and they walked from Belgian border to The Hague, arriving a day late to a standing ovation. The world's media were predictably disdainful.
But the women were not deterred from bringing forward an entirely new transformative worldview, asking how can reason, humanity and love prevail? In her opening address, Congress President Jane Addams offered a potent axiom about the active nature of peace. Peace is not merely an absence of war. Peace is the nurture of human life. Working together in what was a marvelous early case study of feminist thought, these women passed 20 insightful resolutions that included Julia Grace's plan to end the war and identified a raft of conditions for the establishment of permanent peace. We can hear their Resolution 1 sung here by Louise Page and a chorus of women.
Just let people read it for a second. In 1915, although some countries were democracies, universal suffrage was uncommon, and no international laws and mechanisms existed to govern peace and mediate hostilities. The Congress resolutions had as their core objectives to end the war, bring universal suffrage, and prevent future wars. Envoys from the Congress took Julia Grace Wales' peace plan to heads of government across Europe and to President Woodrow Wilson in the US. These men showed interest in this most sensible plan, but it was never formally implemented. The war continued and killed 40 million people. The resolutions for establishing permanent peace, however, have shaped much of international human rights law of the past 100 years.
In 1918, President Wilson included 9 of the resolutions in his 14-point plan, which would subsequently influence the formation of the League of Nations and then the United Nations.
The women agreed that respect for nationality and the right to autonomy and democracy should not be refused to any people.
In 1915, only about 1/8 of the world's nations were democratic, while today about 2/3 are. In democratic nations, there is universal suffrage.
The women agreed that territorial annexation without consent must be illegal.
In 1945, the United Nations Charter outlawed territorial annexation.
The women proposed that the governments of nations should come to an agreement to refer future international disputes to arbitration or conciliation.
In 1945, the United Nations Charter mandated peaceful negotiated settlement of disputes.
The women suggested that an International Court of Justice be created.
This was established in 1945 under the United Nations Charter.
Some resolutions have taken longer to come into being. The women advocated freedom of commerce, shipping and trade to all nations.
80 years later, in 1995, the World Trade Organization came into being.
The women protested vehemently against the odious wrongs of which women are victims at the time of war, and especially against the horrible violation of women which attends all war.
Atrocities inflicted upon women and girls during times of war were recognised as war crimes in 2000 under the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325. This resolution also recognised the need for women to be included in peacemaking infrastructure.
However, some resolutions that would truly achieve permanent peace have still to be adopted. The Congress advocated universal disarmament, which they believed could only be secured by international agreement. They saw in the private profits accruing from the great armament industries a powerful hindrance to the abolition of war.
Today, the weapons manufacture and trade industries remain lucrative and in private hands.
While many treaties exist to protect children and their education as a basic right and requirement for peace,
today it is still not mandated that children be taught about peaceful international legal values and conflict resolution.
Jane Addams, the Congress President, and Emily Greenbalg, the Vice President, would later become Nobel Peace Laureates, acknowledging their involvement in the Congress, as well as their tireless work with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which was formed at that Congress and continues today. With this story in mind, my discussion paper and subsequently the Women's Climate Congress is based on two important ideas. First, that at this moment in history, women's voices are urgently needed to rebalance the centuries-old systems, I'm going quite fast now because we're a little bit behind time, and structures that have been led by men for the past few thousand years. Our governance systems, policy frameworks, economics, business management, leadership, and much else reflect a male lens, which tends towards hierarchical and combative leadership style, technology, extraction of resources. Furthermore, the founding fathers of economics placed caring, regeneration and nurture of life outside the main policy arena, along with the women themselves. And although women are now welcomed and are participating in increasing numbers, they are fitting into these systems. It's not to say that men are wrong per se, or that women have all the answers, just that things are out of balance. And the World War I case study shows us what women bring to the table when they work together on their own terms. So it seemed timely for a women's movement to build not just the numbers of women in positions of power, but their access to the policy agenda and real authority, moving beyond women fitting in to assuming their full autonomy and agency. And secondly, we just cannot solve a wicked problem like climate change through adversarial, conflict-driven politics. We just can't. We need deep listening and collaboration to create rapid, united change. And we need economic systems that foreground nurture of life and care for the earth, must inform decision-making at all levels of governance. We know that government is really complicated, with lots of different voices to balance, and it is very hard. But the Fury story tells us the laws of physics are immutable. Oh, I forgot to move the slide on for that bit. First Nations peoples and modern climate scientists have been teaching us this, and we need to find ways to work together to solve the problem before our grandchildren suffer the consequences. As Julia Grace Wales said, it is the natural thing to do. We need a way for politicians and aligned groups of citizens who are currently thinking in polarised ways, with their backs to the wall, to come together in a thinking process that could offer the opposing forces an opportunity to stop arguing, listen and collaborate to resolve this very difficult issue together, without it having to be a win-lose situation. Riffing off Julia Grace's plan to end the war, in my discussion paper I suggested that we need a process to mediate the different perspectives and develop a national agreement that meets the scientific criteria for a safe future while looking after those affected by the changes. So on 20th of January 2020, amidst the scene of shredded trees and smashed cars caused by a massive hailstorm in Canberra that day, 32 women arrived at the Australian Centre for Christianity and Culture, hoping that women's voices and leadership, collaborating beyond partisan positions, could show the way to address climate change. Jenny Robinson, one of our founding members, was looking after the registration desk. Afterwards, she wrote,
"Women arrived, slowly, then more quickly. Many arrived close to the start time, hiatus, unable to move from the table, preoccupied with the trashed and shredded trees, overwhelmed. Car parks full of cars, all scarred by hail. A late start, polite listening, sensing gradual grounding, deeper listening. Then a chorus of women sang Dear Earth. Participants were transcended to that place, far from where they were minutes before. Now connected to the ground, to the chorus women and to each other, they were ready."
We had answered nature's call and we formed the Women's Climate Congress. We developed a vision statement to achieve climate security by 2030, and we wrote a set of values and commitments that expressed the cultural change that we longed for. Ooh, where's that gone? There we go. Then we set out about creating a non-partisan network of women across the country who related to our principles. COVID played into our hands, sending us onto Zoom and talking to women across the country. Today, we have about 800 members spread out across most federal electorates and many thousands of other regular contacts and social media followers. We've held numerous online events, webinars, and in-person events, including a 2-day event in Canberra in 2022, a National Congress of Women, and we've spoken to thousands of women and MPs, senators, and other decision makers. And at the same time, we've been listening and learning. And what we have heard adds up to a consistent call for action from women. Like the women who came together for the 1915 International Congress and developed a radical new agenda for international human rights, law reform and diplomacy, we thought it was time again for women to set the agenda for action on climate change and ongoing human and planetary well-being. So we gathered our findings and ideas into the Women's Climate Congress Charter for Change. Like Resolution 1 from 1915 to 1915 Congress that we heard earlier, the opening statements reflect our horror at the current climate situation. I'm not going to read them out now because we're a bit short of time. I'm not going to say too much more, in fact, because there's lots about the Charter around the room. We've given you copies, each a copy. If you haven't already got your copy, they're at the registration desk. But just to say that, like the 1915 women, we had 2 timeframes in mind. First, an immediate timeframe to reduce emissions and draw down carbon to stabilise the climate. That's a little bit like stopping the war. And the longer term to make more profound systemic and cultural changes so that we can live sustainably with nature, which is rather like the principles of permanent peace. So, I won't go there. So we launched the Charter at a creative event in the Members' Hall of the Australian Parliament House on November 22, attended by women parliamentarians from across all the parties. Since then, we've taken it on the road and run a number of events framed around the Charter. Basically, it's our start, I suppose, at an agenda that women can build on, a vision that could be taken out to the world, to an international Congress of Women in relation to climate change, maybe in connection with COP31 if Australia gets to host it. I'm going to sort of wind up because I think you're probably getting the picture. But just to finish, the thing about the old Greek play by Aeschylus about the Furies of Earth is that it had a happy ending. The Eumenides is the only Greek tragedy that has a happy ending. Under the guidance of Athena, the goddess of civilized wisdom, the people learn to revere the earth again, and the Furies return to their nurturing earth mother form as the Eumenides, otherwise known as the kindly ones. And with that thought, we end... Hang on, go back. With a chorus of women singing in the Marble Foyer in March 2023 on the 20th anniversary of their first appearance in that space as the world's first flash mob in 2003. This time, with permission, a chorus of 100 women and some men sang a promise to the earth and future generations, with politicians, members of the public and national media watching on. So just imagine the scene in the... That's it.